Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our meeting today. We're just waiting for a few more people to join and then we will get started. We like to try and stick to time, so we'll probably give it another minute or so and then we'll get started. Could we please ask everyone to remain on mute whilst we all join, and then I will give more guidance and instructions when we do the housekeeping.
Greetings all.
Good morning. Right, I think we're going to get started and then my colleague Marcus will just let people in as they arrive and they can have a little catch up. The first thing is that our meetings are recorded so we can use them to circulate afterwards and for people to pick up after the meeting. If you'd not like to be seen or heard on the recording, we would ask that you turn your video and your audio off and just let us know in the chat. So my name's Natasha and I head up the events team at Business West and I'm facilitating the meeting for you today, and I will then hand over to my colleagues to run the meeting and give you all the information that we'd like to share with you today. So we ask that everyone please stays on mute throughout the meeting. We will unmute you during the Q&A if you've posted any questions for you to ask your own question. If you don't want to ask your own question, then just let us know and we'll read it out for you. When we'll start in a minute and my colleague Ian will do, it's very easy because we've got two introductions by Ian's, Ian Mean and Ian Larrard. So Ian and Ian will do their welcomes and intro, and then we will get on to the main presentations. If during the meeting you have any questions or any comments, could you please use the chat facility to post those? You can post chat to everyone in the group, or you can post chat to individual people. There's just a little drop down arrow if you want to talk to someone specifically. We will save the chat afterwards if there's anything we need to pick up outside of the meeting. So if there is something that you wanted to reference or you were asking for details or something, and it's not a question as such, we will be able to pick that up with our team and you following the meeting. So I think that's about it for housekeeping. As I say, if you have any questions or you're having any tech issues, please pop those into the chat, as my colleague Marcus will be monitoring the chat and helping you out as we go along. So thank you all very much for joining us today, and I'm now going to hand over to Ian and Ian to do their welcomes.
Thank you, Natasha, and thank you for organising everything. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to what is the first of a Swindon and Wiltshire and Gloucestershire Zoom meetings, combined meetings. Ian Mean and myself have been talking about trying to do such meetings, not on a Zoom platform, but physically for some time. But the present circumstances have brought us together to be able to do this via Zoom. So welcome, everybody. Good to see so many faces, but some of you may not know me. My name is Ian Larrard, and I'm the director of Business West in Swindon and Wiltshire, and working closely with Ian Mean, who I'll introduce in a minute. Business West, for those of you that might not know, because again, there may be a few on the call that might not be so aware of what Business West does, we're one of the largest business support and representative organisations in the country. We work with something in the order of about 23,000 businesses across the southwest, and we've been doing a huge amount of work and business support over the last 10, 11 weeks or so, creating a digital platform Trading Through Coronavirus, which has received huge numbers of visits, but I won't take anything away from Matt because he'll explain that in a lot more detail in a minute. This is the first of 3 such meetings with local members, local professionals helping our local members as well. So we've titled this one Business Survival. The next one in a couple of weeks' time, we're going to call Trading Out of Lockdown, the new norm. Almost an overused phrase now, as much as unprecedented has become, but and then a third one at the beginning of July, which is slightly more positive vein in terms of new opportunities and growth going forwards. Just before we start, a big thank you to all of our speakers today for in advance of their sessions. Southwest Business Finance, Royds, Withy, King, and to Hazlewoods, and of course to Matt Griffith, our Director of Policy. And with that, I think I'll hand over to Ian to introduce himself, and then in turn he's going to introduce Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I'm Ian Mean. I'm Director in Gloucestershire. I'm also a main board member of the LEP here in Gloucestershire. As Ian has said, this is the first of a series of meetings. I think Gloucestershire and Wiltshire, we're pretty close together, but we all share common challenges and problems at the moment. I want to now introduce Matt Griffith. Now, Matt Griffith is the Policy Director of Business West. A lot of you, Matt's a bit of a media star these days. I think he's got a beard on today, but you know, he normally wears glasses, and you see him on Points West, and he's done a fantastic job with his team on putting the sort of questions out there and campaigning with government, particularly on especially the government grants. And you've probably seen quite a lot on our campaign on workspace. People have been falling through the cracks of these grants. So he's done a great job. I'm not going to go on any longer, but just introduce you to Matt. Matt, over to you.
Thanks very much, Ian. Yeah, I'm looking a bit more dishevelled than I usually look if someone puts a camera in front of my face, so bear with me. Good morning, everyone. What I wanted to do really was to tell you what we can offer your business, because we are the Chamber of Commerce for your region, and we pride ourselves on being independent and impartial and trusted. And what we've tried to do through this crisis is draw on all the kind of strengths of our network and provide support and guidance and also troubleshooting, because it's obviously a fast-moving environment, and we want to help you survive and prosper. So I just want to run through what we're offering to you and how you can access our services and access our support. The first and most important thing is we've set up a web platform called Trading Through Coronavirus. We did this pretty quickly before lockdown was announced. What it's designed to do is enable you to access the most timely information and also ask questions. So we've got a team of 12 business advisors who are plugging into this. You can pose your own question about your specific business concerns. We will then try and answer it within 2 working days. And also we put on their platform all the other questions we've answered. A lot of those questions will look familiar to you or kind of contain information that is useful, whether it's about what type of government support there is, the details around how you can access it, some of the issues surrounding those, for example. So that's the first area. If we could move on to the next slide. And we've answered 335 questions, and we'd very be keen to get your further questions if you have them, and we're unable to answer them in this session. The second area is we're drawing on the strength of our network, and we've got a lot of member content from professional experts to give you more detailed advice around the issues that you've been facing. So up till now, those have been things like employment law, financial management, things about insolvency, and some broader kind of people things about how to communicate with your staff, how to do good company communications, and also how to reach out for further sales in this new online environment. So do go there and see what we're doing. If you feel you have got something you can offer the broader business community in terms of your expertise, please do approach us. We have a fantastic Google ranking, which means that our blogs are getting really high up, first page, kind of second or third, fourth result around some of these questions. So do feel free to approach us. Up there on this slide is a list of some of the people who've provided excellent content. We're evolving that content all the time. If we can go to the next slide. What we're trying to do now is to move on to provide these kind of sessions. So we're rolling out a video and podcast series. Ian Mean has been an excellent, he's moved from newspaper editor to DJ and topical host. He's doing a podcast every couple of days, checking in with businesses, understanding what they're doing, commenting on what the latest developments are. So do look into that. And we're rolling out a series of webinars as well. So we're looking to do those on helping you with some of those key business questions as we start to emerge from lockdown. And next slide. And the final areas is traditionally what we've always tried to do. We're not trying to replicate government advice. What we're trying to do is provide guidance, but also help you with problems where you might feel there are key concerns that aren't being addressed. You might feel there are gaps in support, or you might feel that there are pressing questions that government needs to address. So we've been working very closely with our British Chambers colleagues in London, who have had kind of unprecedented access to ministers and senior officials on a daily basis. We've been really helping to feed into those discussions, fine-grained examples of specific issues that have then been raised and resolved. We're also at local level in very regular dialogue with council leaders, with let boards and with officers about how particular schemes are impacting and what recovery plans might look like. Again, if you have questions, if you have problems either at national policy level or local level, do raise with us and we'd be very happy to channel you in there. And some of those things we've been doing, we've been very instrumental in, for example, some of the furlough guidance. We were the Chamber of Commerce that raised the issue that guidance didn't allow people with childcare responsibilities to be furloughed. We got that clarified and that was allowed. We've been a big lobby behind the furlough extension, and we've been doing a lot on local authority grants as well. So next slide is just to highlight what's been happening there. It's just to give you an example of the type of area where we can help your business. We responded very quickly around the kind of business rates grants, which were announced at the beginning of March. It became clear that for quite a few businesses who had fixed property costs were falling through that because they were paying their business rates as part of the rental package rather than direct. We lobbied the Small Business Minister several times about that and announced firstly, and he announced because of that, a new discretionary fund to target those additional businesses. We also found that that fund, for some bizarre reason, excluded the self-employed, and we then lobbied him again. We had a face-to-face, well, video to video, to be honest, conversation with him a couple of weeks ago, and last weekend, they announced that the self-employed could apply for those grants, and we're now working locally with our local authorities about how those grants will be implemented. And there's a story we helped set up in the Financial Times, which drew on some case studies of individual businesses like you we've been speaking to. And the final issue is, next slide, just around intelligence. Hearing from you is really important. You're the kind of what enables governments to finesse and make better decisions. And what we're interested in now is obviously a lot of the focus has been on the degree of government support. And what we're interested in now is the next phases really. The first is changing guidance around how we move out of lockdown and how you as businesses can protect your staff and customers, but also get back to work as quickly as possible. So any issues you have with that about ambiguity or concern, do get in touch with us. And the final area is about trying to shape a recovery. So realizing that this has been a big economic shock, looking at how best we can move out of it as quickly as possible, and doing that by advising our local leaders and local LEPs, but also national government about the type of interventions we might want to see. So again, if you feel you need an extra boost or you feel there's a particular form of intervention that's needed, get in touch and we will feed that into our work. And that's it from me. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Matt, and thank you for all the hard work that you've been putting in. And I suppose what you just said at the end there is where we're moving, hopefully, from the crisis side of things into more into recovery, is where our the series of 3 meetings that we've got planned takes us through. Our next presenter is Steve Barrett, who is director and one of the founders of Southwest Business Finance. I've known Steve for a long time, ex-colleagues at HSBC, as indeed some of his own colleagues are within Southwest Business Finance. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Steve, to give us a bit of a rundown on all things loans, money, cash especially.
Morning all. It's a pleasure to be here today, and yeah, thanks Ian for inviting me along. Obviously I'm talking about interruption loans predominantly, but let's get it out there that it is business as usual. So any business needing finance for anything else other than interruption loans or distress, then there is funding and banks' appetite to do that. But fundamentally, obviously, there are people in financial difficulty, seeing pressures of businesses having to be shut or turnover falling off significantly, which is causing significant cash flow pressures. So we've had approaches from all sectors of business, and we've been happy to help and signpost and talk them through what needs to happen to help them along. The actual interruption loan scheme today, the update was that £31.3 billion has been lent through the interruption scheme, and they've helped 745 businesses. But when we speak to the high street banks, our contacts, they still have a very huge volume of requests, and there is a backlog. So it is taking time for this to be processed. So they do ask to be patient. I spoke to NatWest the other day, and they said, well, we've got 10,000 accounts to open. So administration-wise, it's a challenge. The first part of the interruption scheme is the bounce back, which was launched by the government for loans up to £50,000. And I have to take my hat off to the banking world and my ex-colleagues in the bank, that they have actually had to mobilise a system that is which is fully automated, and you can key in and request that loan, and funds are generally in your account within the next day or 2 days. And I think that's been a great help, and it has taken the pressure off the banks for requests for interruption loans, which is a lot more easier to deal with. There are some gaps though, and the actual, if you need more than £50,000, then you have to apply for an interruption loan, which ultimately is covering loans up to a maximum of £5 million. 45 million turnover businesses can apply up to that level. And unfortunately, there are a few bank customers, like Handelsbank customers at the minute, aren't able to be assisted. But the Handels hopefully are working on that to get themselves added to the list of accredited lenders, which you can find on the British Business Bank website. But ultimately, you need to prepare an application to a bank for an interruption loan. And as always, the banks are making credit decisions because there is a risk to the bank, and ultimately you are borrowing the money. The government are given a guarantee of 80%, but ultimately your business has to pay it back. So it's not a grant, it is pure debt which you add into your business, and it does need to be paid back. So business banks are taking it very seriously, and their credit teams are assessing them as they would do any normal application. Obviously there is sympathy in terms of current circumstance. So that's the key part that we say, well, let's get an application rolling, is to look at the financial account, 3 years financial accounts from pre-COVID. And ultimately we need to be seeing profits. We are seeing that if businesses are loss making, then banks are saying that you weren't viable before COVID, and COVID is not going to make you viable going forward. And those types of businesses are seeing a large amount of declines. Obviously, sometimes when there's a loss, there's a reason for a loss, And as an advisor, we would be trying to outline to the bank why a business has made a loss, not purely because it wasn't viable or turnover had fallen off or whatever. They might have been expanding, they might have been investing in future products which created the loss. So it needs to be explained rather than a complete black or white. You've made a loss, so you don't qualify. But you might find yourself being kicked out of the queue for that one point. We're also looking at the credit worthiness of the directors and the owners of the business. So if you do have a bankruptcy, or if you do have CCJs or bad credit, then again, that is going to impact on your ability to obtain an interruption loan. But again, there could be reasons for that which can be mitigated or explained away. Next question is, well, how much money do you need to borrow on interruption loans? So, you know, we need to know how much you want and how that number has been worked out. So cash flows, so accountants need to come in to help in terms of preparing cash flows, but are those cash flows calculated on previous trading levels or assumptions on what the trading levels are going to be? So it's just making sense that we know what number we're looking at and get the right number. Because as always, if you ask for too much, the answer could be no. If you don't ask for enough, you're probably going to find yourself in another problem in a few months' time. They do ask to see 6 months bank statements, so they can see what's been going on in the previous pre-COVID time. Also in your personal bank statements as well, so they can see, you know, just spotting if there's anything that was there before COVID hit, which could cause a concern for them getting their money back. If you ask for a loan up to £250,000, then, you know, there is no personal guarantee requirement for you. So the government will guarantee 80%, and the banks can fund up to 250. So you have no more personal liability, but your business is obviously borrowing the money, as I previously said. There's some fundamental questions whereby just borrowing money doesn't solve a problem in this current circumstance. So the questions that I ask, or I try to put into proposal, are what have you done to help yourself, basically, in terms of trying to sort out payments. So have you asked for payment holidays on your private mortgage to reduce your personal income? Have you asked for payment for rent holidays? Have you furloughed staff? Have you made pay cuts? You know, we've seen a lot of that. So what have you done to try and help yourself? And then the next question is, when the pandemic is hopefully resolved or we're moving on, what do you think the challenges you're going to face are going to be going forward? What is your business going to look like? And just sort of face up to those challenges, because the next question is, well, what are you going to do to change your business to overcome those challenges? So it comes down to business plan and business strategy, even to the point where I think someone picked up the point that we can't network anymore like we used to do. So we can't go and meet in big network meetings and rub shoulders, because that's not a done thing. But how do we meet our clients? So all these challenges, the bank wants to know what they are, and they want to know what you're going to do about them, and then feed that into your business plan and your cash flow, and then you'll work out how much you need to borrow. Ultimately, the first 12 months of this loan is going to be supported by the bank. So the interest cost of the loan and the fees to set it up are going to be paid by the bank, and that's basically is your business interruption payment that's going to be calculated and paid by the government to the bank. And then after the 12 months is up, the loan is over to you to service. I think it's due to roll out. I mean, Matt might say a bit more on this until October time. There might be some more extensions, but I guess it does depend on how much money there is to support the scheme. But it is working, but there are people that are falling through the gaps. Conventional finance are loans, but if you look at the British Business Bank and the accredited lenders, there are a mixture of asset finance lenders and invoice finance lenders in there as well. So some instances, what we've done recently are that we had a scrap merchant, big machinery. We managed to do an asset finance loan on 3 bits of unencumbered kit worth about £500,000, and ultimately you would do a 75% of the value in a normal world, but in a pandemic world, then you can get an interruption loan that means they can lend 100% of the value of the asset. So it ended up with an interruption loan whereby the government are paying the interest for 12 months. The lender's got a charge over the asset, but it's lent a bit more with the comfort of the bank guarantee. So that worked really well to inject cash into the business. Invoice finance providers, generally, I think their base product is saying they lend 80% of the value of an invoice, but they can go up to 90 on the interruption loan basis, again with government support. So there are other forms of finance. There are other lenders that do business loans other than the high street, because one thing that is clear that if you bank with Barclays or Lloyds, you can only go to Barclays or Lloyds. The other banks aren't at the moment entertaining other banks' clients to consider an interruption loan because of the sheer volume that's coming in. That might change, but at this moment in time, interruption loans have to be requested from your current bank. But Funding Circle launched a few weeks ago for a limited number of brokers, of which we were one, and Funding Circle can do loans up to the £250,000 limit. And that is a process which we can help you through with the required information of accounts and bank statements and a story as to what's going on in your business. Other providers that come into the fore in terms of lenders, which you can see again on the list of accredited lenders, which will deal with the same as a bank, but their appetite, they are smaller banks, so they have less money to lend and will take a cautious approach, but they are all out there to help. And I think in the financial world, the bank managers and advisors around are there to support all businesses, and likewise my business is there to support all businesses through this to find the right solution for them. So I think that's about all, Ian. I think we won't cover the large interruption, the corporate interruption, on the basis that we've got any of those sorts of clients here, but happy to help anybody if they make contact with us direct.
Thanks very much, Steve. And I'm sure there may be some questions later on that
Sure.
you're all happy to pick up. If I could now move on to Malcolm Gregory, who is senior partner in Royds, Withy, solicitors. Malcolm, well, I say he's based in Swindon, was spending one day a week, I think, or one day a fortnight up in London, and obviously Royds, Withy, have offices in Bath and Oxford, London, Bristol, and you've been a very busy person, I guess, over the last 10 weeks or so, Malcolm, with furloughing and all things employment law. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ian. It's an interesting time as an employment lawyer. I've been doing the job for nearly 30 years, and I've lived through many recessions. And employment lawyers tend to be a bit counter-cyclical. So when the rest of the world's doing okay, we're doing sort of all right. But then when the world collapses, we rub our hands together and it seems to be going well. But I have to be honest with you, it's been the strangest few months I think I've ever seen from an employment law perspective. There was the initial panic, but then it started to settle down. And essentially the furlough scheme has had the exact effect that the government wanted, which is to make everybody take a really deep breath and not do anything. So we are now seeing a slight lull in terms of what I would call normal business, but we are seeing a lot of people talking to us about restructures and redundancy. So what I thought I'd do is just give you some headlines in terms of the things that have been keeping me busy. To kick off, I am going to use the F word, furlough, I'm afraid. I'm going to tell you about what happens. And the reason is that every week or so, the rules change. And I've never had to give advice on guidance that didn't exist, which is exactly what happened when furlough was announced by the Chancellor. Late on a Friday, I have to say, my phone was already ringing for appointments ready for the Monday morning. And we know about furlough, we know what the basic rules are, but it's changing. And the key points for you to bear in mind in terms of what's going on is that for June and July, the scheme is remaining unchanged. So you'll still get a grant of 80% of the employee's pay, capped at £2,500, plus the value of employers' national insurance and pension. But then from August, the government are going to require you to pay the national insurance and pension contributions, which somebody much more clever than me has worked out is about 5% of the total cost of employing that person. So there will be a gradual phasing back in of the cost onto the employer. Then in September, what's going to happen is that the scheme will only pay 70%, and that will be capped at 2,190. And the employer then will be required to top up to the 80%. So in other words, they'll give 10%, plus they'll be paying the national insurance and pension. And then the scheme will finish at the end of October, but in October, it will only pay 60%, capped at £1,875, and then the employer will be paying 20% top up plus the national insurance and pension. A bit of a straw poll, I would say 10 to 15% of clients that I've dealt with over the last couple of months have been topping up furlough payments beyond the grant available from the government. Not a huge number. In fact, quite a few people felt quite bad about the whole scheme to start with. And certainly a few clients were wrestling with the idea that they could in fact afford to pay their staff. So why would they take taxpayers' money and put people on furlough? And it was an interesting debate for 2 or 3 weeks until they realised that it was free money, and then most people availed themselves of it. So it's a complex scheme. It's confusing. The rules change. Treasury guidance sometimes is different to the government guidance that gets issued. There is a really important thing that you need to know about if you know anybody who's being about to be furloughed. If they're not furloughed by Wednesday, the 10th of June, and therefore furloughed for 3 weeks by the end of June, you won't be able to put them on furlough afterwards. In other words, the scheme's going to be closed to new entrants from the end of June. And because the minimum period of furlough is 3 weeks, you have to be furloughed from the 10th of June. Some of my clients are saying, well, we're going to furlough a couple of people on the basis we don't have quite enough work for them. We'll have them back in July, but it does mean then we do have the option of furloughing them later on during the rest of the furlough scheme. That's really important. The other big change is on the 1st of July, you are allowed to work part-time, and that will not break the furlough scheme. So you're entitled to be paid normally by your employer for whatever hours you're working, and then you can have that topped up to the 80% by the furlough scheme. That's to be done in 1 week minimums. And as with all the drip feeding of information that we've been getting out, the detailed guidance, well, I say detailed, the guidance will come out on the 12th of June. And we'll all be waiting for that, and I'm sure the telephone will be red hot at that stage. It is, I think, a very good thing, because there are lots of organisations who are caught between having enough work, wanting to get some people back, but not being able to afford the full cost. So I think it was a very good move by the government to do that. They are being quite tactical with all of this and the announcements I'm finding. So lots of organisations were preparing to do mass redundancies a couple of weeks ago, and you'll be aware, and I'll move on to redundancy and reorganisation now. Normally in a recession, you have lots of redundancies, and it's pretty straightforward, and people get on with it because they realise there isn't enough work available. The furlough scheme has paused people and employers from taking that sort of action. And when we were about to see a large number of employers make a large number of redundancies, so more than 20 people in a 90-day period triggers the statutory obligation to collectively consult for 30 days, or more than 100 redundancies, you've got to collectively consult for 45 days. Because of those timings and those triggers, a lot of employers were poised to start those processes. And then lo and behold, on the Sunday evening, the Prime Minister says we're going to relax the lockdown, which really didn't mean relax the lockdown, but it made everybody think twice. And then very shortly afterwards, the Chancellor came on and announced some changes to the scheme, which then stopped people carrying on with their collective redundancy processes. Literally did stop a lot of people in their tracks. So I think it was quite strategic and tactical, and if that was their intention, I think they got the outcome that they wanted. I am seeing a lot of clients now looking at complex restructures and reorganisations. That's not just dismissing people, that's asking people to take permanent changes to their contract. So that might be pay cuts, that might be flexing their hours, all sorts of things are up for grabs, and they are required to be done either by consent with the workforce, or if you're potentially going to dismiss people and re-engage them on the new terms, if that encounters a group of more than 20 people, again, you've got to collectively consult. And that's starting to give employers who haven't had to deal with that sort of change before something to think about. So there's a lot of that going on. Notice pay during furlough, that sort of thing. That's a real issue. So holidays during furlough, actually. But when you're restructuring and you're making redundancies and you're dismissing people, what notice pay do you pay? Can somebody be on notice during furlough? All of these questions are coming out of the restructuring advice that we're giving. The next big headache, and I think the next big piece of flood, almost, of litigation that we're likely to see in 12 months' time, or certainly when the tribunals, who are doing their best, but when they get back to more normal business, relates to health and safety. And so it comes in two tranches. It's about making your workplace safe, and you've got to do your risk assessments, and we've seen the 32-page guidance documents on COVID that the government introduced, and they're very useful. And for those that are used to doing risk assessments, they can add them into their normal risk assessments, print them out, tick the boxes, and do the best you can. For those that are quite relaxed on risk assessments normally, or don't really know what one is, then it's a bit of a shock, and that's a real issue, because you have a statutory duty to provide a safe system of work, and if you don't do it, potentially you're looking down the barrel of some criminal activity, criminal offences. So it's really important you get it right. But the back end of this, the real issue that you're all going to be facing soon, is the return to work and the absolute refusal by many employees to come back into the office or into the workplace or into the factory. And that's because they don't feel it's safe. Now, there aren't that many areas of law in employment context which you haven't seen over a period of 30 years, but there are a couple of areas which don't come up very often, and one of them is health and safety dismissals or detriments. And there are a couple of sections that HR people are talking about a lot, which are sections 44 and sections 100 of the Employment Rights Act. Write it down and look it up. Basically, if an employee's got a reasonable belief that their employment, where they're working, is not safe, if they believe there to be a serious and imminent risk of danger, and they are then subjected to a detriment because of that, not being paid or even being dismissed, then they've got claims. And in fact, if they got less than 2 years service and you dismiss them for failing to come into your workplace because they reasonably believed it to be unsafe, it's an automatic unfair dismissal, and they don't need 2 years service. All employment lawyers are now very familiar with that section, whether they're acting for employees or employers. CABs are very familiar with that section. It will be a real issue. The key to dealing with it is communication, and the key to dealing with it, in my view, is not pushing people back too soon. The furlough scheme is in place for a reason, so you don't have to rush back into the workplace. You've got to ensure that you're doing your risk assessment, you're setting up the safe system, and that you're following that system. And if you communicate with your employees enough, then maybe their reasonable view of what's serious and imminent danger won't be reasonable. Those are the main issues that we're going to see. The tribunals will start to pick these claims up in about 12 months' time, and I'm imagining I'm going to be busy for that period, sadly.
Okay, thanks very much, Malcolm. Next up, we've got Ruth Dooley. Ruth is a colleague of mine on the main board of the LEP here. I've known her for many years, and Ruth is a partner in Hazlewoods, and Hazlewoods the largest accountants in Gloucestershire. So Ruth.
Good morning, everyone. I was asked to talk about business survival. That made me think survival of the fittest. So we have a Darwin theme to this talk. The latest survey I've seen on COVID-19 is that 90% of those businesses surveyed thought that COVID-19 had had a negative effect on their business, and only 80% were fully operational again. As far as the biggest concerns for businesses, the survey did show in the past versions of it that cash flow was the real issue, but that's actually changed. 63% of those surveyed felt loss of customers was their biggest issue, and it was only 25% that cited cash flow as being one of their main issues. So, can we have the next slide, please? I thought I would think of those points, and my little talk is going to be about cash being king, communication being key, a little bit about finance from government, although Steve's covered that pretty well, and some other ideas, and finally about thinking ahead. Next slide, please. Okay, so cash is king. It's a cliche. Nice picture of a lion. Hope you like it. Well, so what can you do to help preserve cash? Well, the obvious thing is to review what you're spending. Look at your operational costs. Have a think about what is absolutely necessary, what can be pared back, particularly discretionary spend. You know, if you've got a large, well, your entertaining budget is probably going to be reduced anyway because of social distancing. But there may be other aspects of discretionary spend that can be cut back. Capital expenditure, if it's possible to make that bit of kit last a bit longer, patch it up, put off buying another one till next year, that would be very sensible. Also think about other people's credit limits to you. Check them, see if you can delay a payment a bit and still be within your terms. And also look at your own terms to customers and see if those can be amended without damaging your business. The other thing is bill early. We've got a VAT holiday at the moment until next March. I think it's 31st of March, you can defer your VAT. So actually that helps your cash flow, because if you can bill and keep the VAT for a while, that should help to tide things over. But as Steve said, one of the key things is to have a cash flow. And I've put a rolling cash flow on the basis that if your cash flow can get out of date very quickly. So I would suggest a 12-month rolling cash flow, and as 1 month drops off, you put the month in at the other end, so that you have a real feel on what's going on with your business. Next slide, please. And if you've got your cash flow, you can then talk to your bank and talk to your lenders. And this bit is really important. Stay in touch with everyone. Stay in touch with your bankers, your lenders, but also talk to your staff, your customers, your suppliers. Be nice to them. I'm sure you are already, but this is an especially important time to be nice to them, because they will, you know, the human things count at this time. And if they think that you've been in touch with them and are looking after them, they might well look after you. It also will tell you who is in trouble, maybe, of your suppliers and customers. And if you need to make arrangements to get suppliers elsewhere, or if you think that customer is facing some real difficulty and you've got a choice of doing a bit of work for one customer who's looking fine and another customer that's looking in trouble, well, you know which one to choose to do the work for. So staying in touch is really, really key, because then you really understand what's going on in terms of the risks to your business. The tax man as well. The worst thing you can do with tax is bury your head in the sand. And actually, I said pick up the phone to the tax man as the business. I think you should. If your agents do it, we don't tend to get really good results compared to our clients. So we always say to our clients, talk directly to the tax man, because they will respond better to you than they do to us, which is a bit of a weird thing, but that's true in practice. And if you are really, you know, the real way to make sure this happens, because day to day you get distracted by the day-to-day things that need to be done, but this communication thing is so important. So I would suggest you have a rota, stroke a diary of calls and communications, so that it's regular and it happens. It doesn't just get put on the back burner. So communication is key. Next point. Next slide, please. Okay, finance for government. Hope you like the cuddly bear with the flowers. That's the idea of the government actually being a real comfort at this time. And I have been surprised, pleased. I do think that the government reacted quickly and reacted early. I've never seen the revenue produce anything quite so quickly as they did in terms of the furlough scheme and the self-employed scheme. It was a very impressive time frame that all this was put together. I mean, I know it was criticised and people were saying at the beginning, we need our cash now, but actually what they achieved in such a short period of time was very impressive, and actually it is something that we'll look back on and think, well, actually that was pretty good. And also, of course, the government stepping in and giving this breathing space, which we wouldn't have. I mean, if we just compare what's going on in America in terms of the redundancies, the job losses, etc. Okay, it might be just deferring some of that pain, but at least it gives a chance for businesses to come through it, hopefully come out the other side, and you know, get going again. It's interesting on furlough. The latest survey I've seen was 52% of businesses in that survey had furloughed staff, and the other interesting statistic was that more than half are not expecting to take everybody back. So that is what you would expect, though, because people who are going on furlough are those who are less necessary to the business than others. So on that basis, they're the ones that are more surplus to requirements than others. And so if the business is going to contract, and I think most businesses will contract or are expected to contract, then those furlough staff come the end of furlough will unfortunately not have jobs. But at least they've had something to help them out in the meantime, and maybe develop other skills if they've used that time for training, etc. So it's been, it might be a sort of a lateral lifeline, but it might be a lifeline for some people. And the other suggestion I have here is get help to get help. A lot of clients that phone me have sort of said, well, where do I go for them help? They've come to me, obviously, so that's great. But, you know, Business West has got a huge amount of resource to help. Lawyers have, the local LEP, the growth hubs. Do go help to get help. So don't think you've got to do all this on your own. There are lots of people out there who really, really want to help businesses through this time. And if you are clever, you use those resources to help survive. Next slide, please. So some other ideas, slightly sort of more off the beaten track. If you are a business that does research and development, then this is a good time to get your claims in. The revenue are turning them around very quickly. I think it's a 30-day repayment period. So actually your R&D claims, if you do them normally towards the end of your year, accelerate them, get those claims in, get the money from the taxman to help with your cash flow. There are also grants for innovation and other grants around. So again, you know, inquire about your sector, your business, whether there are any grants available. Slightly sort of interesting idea is to extend your accounting period. So if you were really profitable, let's say up to December, and then it's all gone horribly wrong in the last few months because of COVID, then if you extend your accounting period so that you have an 18-month period rather than a 12-month period, you can actually use those losses against the historic profits and reduce your tax bill. So you average it over the period of 18 months as opposed to having a 12-month profitable period and then a 6-month loss period. So think about extending your accounting period if that applies to you. And also lateral thinking in terms of forms of finance. Business angels, I'm seeing quite a bit of activity on EIS and SEIS. This is where people invest in business and they get tax breaks for doing so, and they get tax breaks if it all goes horribly wrong. So actually the risk to the investor is substantially reduced. And if your business qualifies for such investment, then it's worthwhile seeking to get some people to invest in your business through those schemes. Next slide, please. So thinking ahead, it's already been said, but really use the lessons that have been learned and the way that you've been doing things in the last few months in COVID times to think about your business processes. Can you be more efficient? Do you really have to travel all that distance? Can you use Zoom more? Can you use technologies? Can you think about maybe going into new products which suit a more sort of IT world and the world we're in? Lots of businesses have done that impressively, you know, particularly sort of producing PPE equipment, etc. Think about what you've got and think laterally about what else it could be used for, what new customers you could have, what new things you could produce, what new services you could provide. And technology. I was hearing someone present on the fact that for quite a lot of business processes, what would have happened over the next 2 years has been accelerated into the last 2 months. Things like businesses that restaurants were starting that didn't have premises, didn't have a building you go to, but were just doing food, producing food and getting it delivered. Well, those businesses have gone absolutely bananas, of course, but they were ahead of the curve, and we were moving in that direction anyway. So actually, what would have happened over the next 2 to 3 years has been accelerated by our whole new way of working. So look at those lessons and think about what they can do for you for the future. And the key thing is make a plan, make a business plan, and then you'll have a clearer idea of where you're going. You'll make yourself fit, and then you should survive. Thank you.
Ruth, thank you. Thank you very much. Good tips there. I like the one, get help. I think that's what we try and do, particularly Matt's team try and do. And we're there as are our partners who are speaking today. We've got some time now for some questions. And I know, Marcus, you've got a few questions there.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. This one's probably directed to either Ian or to Matt, and it's regarding the expected introduction of flexible furlough. What additional support to local businesses will be offered to help them with the transitional plans is the question. So, for example, you know, will businesses have to seek legal support if they were going to make employees redundant?
Matt, I think that's a very good question, but perhaps Matt could have a look at that.
So I think this might be one for Malcolm.
Okay.
Actually, the question. Sorry, the BBC just gave me a call, so I was slightly distracted from the first part. But the question was whether companies can ask for or can ask for legal support. What legal support will be available, you know, in terms of helping to cover costs specifically?
Okay, Malcolm.
Yeah, I'm happy to pick it up. There isn't any support available other than what's already there, and it's exactly the same position you would have been in with furlough at the start. So they've been very clear throughout this whole scheme that you have to work within the confines of existing employment legislation. So if somebody's currently agreed to be on furlough, receiving 80% capped of their pay, and you want them to come in and work 2 days a week, that's an amendment to their contract of employment. And so you need to discuss it with them. And if they agree, it's not a problem. You confirm it in writing. You'll need to confirm it in writing for employment law purposes, but you'll also need to confirm it in writing for the purposes of the furlough scheme. And it's not more complicated than that. Where it will become complicated is if you have a large number of people where you're trying to create quite difficult and complex working patterns with different people coming in, different people coming out, teams A, teams B, going into workplaces to try and ensure social distancing. And how long are you going to have that in place? Is it a permanent change to their contract, or is it a temporary change only for the purposes of the furlough scheme? So as long as you think carefully about when this is going to finish and put as much detail in the agreement with the employee, you'll be fine. Where you won't be fine is if the employee won't agree. And what we're starting to see now is people who are quite risk adverse, sat at home, not shielding, not necessarily more at risk than anyone else, but simply refusing to come back in even on a part-time basis. And that's where you've got other issues such as the health and safety risk and whether or not you can force them to come back into the workplace or work from home.
Thanks, Malcolm.
We've got another question. I don't know if Jessica Bailey from Change Toolbox wants to ask this herself regarding going forward and collaborating across Gloucestershire and Wiltshire. Jessica, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, we can.
Perfect. Yeah, my thinking is that, and Malcolm, thanks for answering that question, Thriller as well. But my thinking really is the collaboration. So I know we have platforms in place, but do we have something, rather than doubling up, we've got people, obviously organisations, businesses that will be looking to make people redundant, we'll be looking people that will want to recruit, because their business model would change. And my whole thinking is, what can we do locally, Swindon Wiltshire, to help support businesses to come together, to give them a platform to work from, so that they have a go-to place?
Ruth, would you, sorry, I didn't think we heard you that clearly, but could you try and pick that up, Ruth?
I mean, if you're looking for a go-to place, the place I would suggest is the Growth Hub, as well as Business West. They sort of have so much information and so much idea of where to point people and where to send them, and really have the most up-to-date information, and are the best sources of help, really, I think. And you know, we'll have the coordinated, joined-up approach. Would you agree, Ian?
Yeah, I mean, I think perhaps offline we can talk to you, and I'm sure Matt and Ian can help you there. But I think going forward, as Ruth had said about planning, you know, this is going to be so important. So could you do that? And can we contact you offline sometime today?
Absolutely. No, thanks, Ruth. Let me make myself really clear, and I obviously didn't, but I feel that it's not information. It's because businesses, unless you're in a large organisation, you aren't going to be familiar. This is new territory for so many businesses, and even if they're looking at information, they're not going to know what to do with it necessarily. Even Q&As, they're not going to know how to react to that. They're going to be so confused or anxious about falling foul of law, statutory or otherwise. And what I'm suggesting is a platform that where it's, I know we've got data protection, we've got, you know, equality, etc., but somewhere where businesses locally could be able to communicate what's happening in their business, so that we almost close the gaps locally from a platform. It's not about information, it's about what's happening in their businesses and how.
So it's sharing stories. I mean, that's something that Matt's team do. And if you look at the coronavirus website of Business West, that's what it's about. And certainly I would suggest that we can come back to you and talk to you separately, can't we, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, what our team has been trying to do is listen to individual business stories, particularly for smaller companies that are confused by the degree of guidance out there, point them in the right direction, have one-to-one discussions with them to offer support and how to navigate that. I think what you're rightly pointing out is we're now on to the next stage, really, which will be not just support and advice about the legals of current government support, but it will be about what economic recovery looks like. And that will be a position where we're going to be waiting for national government to roll out a new set of interventions to help with firms, help deal with liabilities, help them get back up to speed, help to get their people back to work, help to deal with new guidance. And also some big interventions around the labour market and particular sectors. We're kind of waiting for national government to say how it wants to do that at the moment. But if it does do it and cascades it locally, then it will be through the local enterprise partnerships and through the local authorities. And I think our job as a business community is to try and help those government players reach out, understand, and communicate better to their business base, which is sometimes difficult for them. So we are keeping an active eye on that at the moment. But yeah, it would be good to discuss it more.
It would, and I'll contact you offline, but it wasn't stories actually, but I will contact offline so that we can have a conversation.
Okay, Matt's the man. Marcus, anything else there before I've got a couple of questions?
Yeah, we've got a question from Stephanie regarding the refurloughing of part-time workers in July. Stephanie, would you like to ask the question? Probably
Yes.
to Malcolm.
I run a very small training provider in Swindon, and we've been furloughing staff on almost a furlough for 3 weeks and then back. in order for them not to actually be furloughed for a long amount of time. I've noted the 10th of June as the last time you can furlough new staff, but my question is, because of the nature of the workload, we naturally have a decline in July and August anyway. My question is, could I re-furlough staff who have been furloughed prior to June the 10th, but may be back working on June the 10th?
Malcolm, can you pick that one up?
Yeah, no, absolutely. The short answer is yes, based on the paragraph that we've got. I mean, literally, we've got bullet points.
Yeah.
And the only caveat I would give you is that I've been advising on 10 different versions of government guidance since the first couple of paragraphs came out, and sometimes they do change. But based on what I've read and what I can see now, the whole point of this is the government are drawing a line in the sand for new people who've not been furloughed before coming on to the new scheme. So if you furloughed somebody, let's say at the beginning of April for 3 weeks, they've been back working for you for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Or even through into July, because they've already been furloughed, you are able to use furlough again with them with agreement for the rest of the scheme period through to the end of October. That's my understanding. If they've never been furloughed before and you're into July or August, then you will not be able to furlough them.
That's how I understood it. Thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you. Marcus, anything else there?
Chris Green had a similar question regarding furlough. Did that answer your question as well, Chris?
Yes, it did actually. I think it was just that clarification that although it's June the 10th, as long as you've got that in writing, you don't have to submit it on the furlough system to HMRC until July the 31st.
That's absolutely right, Chris. Yeah. So there are two issues here. There is the grant claim under the scheme, which is the financial end of it. And then there is the actual legal bit, which is when are they designated a furloughed worker, which is when their contract has been amended by agreement. So if their contract's been amended by agreement and they're designated furloughed with effect from the 10th of June for a period of 3 weeks or more, and you've got that evidence in writing, that's enough. And then when you're going to do your month end, maybe in July, furlough claim, then you can put that through in the normal way.
Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Marcus.
Ian, sorry, can I just mention that with these meetings we're very conscious that we run to time.
Of course.
It's 11:30 now. We're happy to carry on with the questions and answers session, but if anyone does need to leave to go to other meetings or anything, then we do understand that. But for those of you who are happy to stay on and engage with the Q&A, I think we're all happy to stay on. Is that okay?
Yeah. I think thank you. What I'd like to do is just very quickly for our speakers, Steve, give you a last word, if you're still there.
Still there?
Steve, a last word from you.
Definitely. So I think obviously the finances there. I think I missed that one point in that we have actually got positive news in that businesses are doing well during COVID. I think some, as you say, the restaurant businesses that have the kitchens that ship it out. We've recently had a security company that is providing security and is going for significant growth and needs working capital to do it. That's a positive news story that needs funding to happen, and that is still possible. So there are good news stories in there, and so all the help that I've listened to around all aspects of accountancy and law and chambers and LEPs is brilliant to help businesses, and good businesses will always be good and they will survive, and all the money that has been put around them will enable that to happen. And the one thing I do say to everybody is that just keep paying your bills, and because your suppliers need the money to help pay their suppliers, and it knocks on down the line. So we have to try and keep things as normal as possible so that money keeps flowing around the system and people still get paid their salaries. So let's just on the good, not the bad, and move forward on that basis. But anything to do with money, finance, the good thing is that the banks are strong and they have an appetite, they can help. Whereas the last recession, the banks were in a whole heap of trouble This time they're not, and so yeah, happy to help.
Good, thanks, Steve. The other thing is that let us know some of those good stories. We need positivity. Malcolm, your last word from you.
I suppose it's a tip, really, because things are changing so frequently. Whatever you do in your business, write down why you've done it and print out or save as a PDF the document you've used to rely on. I have people who relied on a document dated the 26th of March issued by the government, which is no longer in existence on the website. And if you took a view and did something and later on were challenged by HMRC or by the government or somebody, at least you've got evidence of what you did at the time. I think that's really important. They do keep disappearing, these documents. So best tip, print it or save it to a PDF.
Good thinking. Ruth, your last word?
Yeah, I agree with that the positivity is the thing to focus on. We are at survival phase at the moment. The next stage is recovery. And I know there's a lot of work going on in government, in local enterprises and LEPs, in local businesses. That is where we need to focus now. We need to focus on where we go in the future and how we are going to return to successful, thriving economy and the participation of all of us in that and the contribution we can give.
Thank you, Ruth. Now back to Ian to sum up.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you for everybody for dialing in. Thank you especially to our presenters, our experts, for giving us a broad array of things that have been going on, but most importantly also things that will be happening in the future. And to end on a positive note there, so a big thank you to Steve and to Malcolm, Ruth, and to Matt as well. As you'll see from the slide there, our next meeting is literally a fortnight from today at the same time, and we're going to look there at sort of trading out of lockdown and what that might look like. And it will be a couple of days on from when a lot of retailers, non-essential retailers, may well have returned to the high street, all being well, on the 15th, and a number of other businesses doing the same. So I think that's an apt title to have a couple of days on from that. So thank you all for joining us, and hopefully join us again in a couple of weeks' time.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Ian.
Thanks very much.
We will be sending a follow-up to everyone who joined the meeting today, and we will have the recording of the meeting available as well. If you enjoyed the meeting today, if you found it useful and productive, please tell everyone, share on your social media. If you didn't, tell us so we can make it better next time. Thank you all very much for attending, and have a lovely couple of weeks, and hopefully we see you again at our next meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Natasha.
Natasha.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth.